When Tom and Rachel Bennett bought the house in early 2024, they had no idea of its history. Nestled in the quiet countryside of West Yorkshire, the property was a modest but elegant home, charming stone walls, a spacious garden, and a long gravel driveway leading up to the front porch. It had been on the market for months, and they got it for a price that seemed too good to be true. The previous owner, rugby legend Burrow, had lived here during his final years, battling motor neuron disease with unwavering courage. It wasn't a place of tragedy, but of love, perseverance, and family. Still, there was something about it, something unspoken that lingered in the walls. At first, the Bennetts felt lucky. The house was quiet, peaceful, a fresh start. But as the weeks passed, small disturbances began to creep into their lives. It started subtly, a whispering draft in rooms with no open windows, the occasional flicker of the hallway light. Then came the sounds at night, footsteps, not heavy, but distinct. Tom, a pragmatic man in his mid-40s, dismissed it as the house settling. "Old homes make noise," he told Rachel, brushing off her growing unease. But Rachel wasn't convinced. She worked from home, often alone for hours, and she swore she heard murmuring voices when no one else was around. Once, she caught a glimpse of something in the hallway mirror, a movement behind her. A figure? She turned quickly, but the space was empty. Then came the dreams, vivid, unsettling. She dreamt of a wheelchair rolling down the hallway on its own, of a shadow lingering by the bedroom door. She dreamt of a voice, faint but clear, whispering words she couldn't quite make out. And every night, she woke at exactly 3:17 a.m., heart pounding, skin clammy, the distinct sensation of being watched. Tom, ever the skeptic, finally started to waver when the voices became real. One evening, as he was locking up for the night, he heard it clear as day, a male voice murmuring from the living room. The words were garbled, indistinct, but undeniably human. He stepped inside, heart hammering. The room was empty. Rachel appeared at the doorway. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He nodded. For the first time since moving in, Tom felt something he couldn't rationalize, an overwhelming sense of presence. Something was still here, and it wasn't leaving. The air in the living room felt different now, thicker, charged with something unspoken. Tom exhaled slowly, his breath uneven, and took a hesitant step forward. The lamp in the corner buzzed softly, its light flickering in a way that didn't feel natural, like the pulse of something unseen. He scanned the room, his eyes tracing over the familiar furniture, the dark wooden coffee table, the bookshelves neatly arranged by Rachel's careful hands, the framed photograph of them on their wedding day, slightly tilted as if someone had nudged it. He reached out and straightened it. The second he let go, the picture tipped again. A slow, cold shiver worked its way up his spine. Rachel stood in the doorway, unmoving. He could sense her breathing behind him, shallow and controlled, the way she always did when she was afraid but trying not to show it. He turned his head slightly, enough to see her in his peripheral vision. Her arms were crossed over her chest, her fingers gripping her upper arms, as if trying to ground herself. "It's just a draft," Tom muttered, though even he didn't believe it. Rachel didn't respond. The sound came again, a voice low, strained, more of a breath than words. Not from the living room this time, from the hallway. Rachel's hand found his wrist, fingers cold against his skin. He could feel the faint tremor in them, the way she clung to him, not forceful, but desperate. They turned in unison, eyes locked on the darkened hallway that led toward the staircase. It stretched before them like a corridor into something unseen, the edges of the walls barely visible in the dim light. The old wooden floor, solid and unmoving during the day, now seemed treacherous, every step forward uncertain. Rachel spoke first, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You heard it, didn't you?" Tom swallowed, his throat dry. "Yeah." He wasn't sure what was worse, the sound itself or the overwhelming sense that they weren't supposed to be hearing it. Like they had intruded on something, crossed some unseen boundary in a house that wasn't entirely theirs. Rachel took a step closer to the hallway, her fingers slipping from his wrist. Tom reached out instinctively, grabbing her hand before she could go any farther. "Wait!" His voice was firm but not unkind. She hesitated, looking up at him. In the dim light, her features were sharp, her usually warm brown eyes shadowed with something unreadable. Not fear, at least not just fear. Curiosity, perhaps. A strange kind of pull. Tom wasn't sure which of them moved first, but they found themselves stepping forward together, slow and deliberate, their bare feet soundless against the wooden floor. The hallway stretched long and quiet before them. And then the whisper came again, clearer this time, so close it felt like someone was standing just behind them. "Help!" Rachel sucked in a breath. Tom stiffened, every muscle in his body going rigid. Neither of them turned around. Neither of them wanted to see what might be standing there. The silence that followed was worse than the whisper itself. It pressed in from all sides, thick and unmoving, as if the very walls of the house were holding their breath. Tom's skin prickled with an unnatural chill, not just the cold of an old house at night, but something deeper, something that reached into his bones. He could hear the blood rushing in his ears, the sharp, rhythmic thud of his own heartbeat. Rachel didn't move. She stood frozen beside him, her breathing shallow, her grip tightening around his hand until her nails pressed into his skin. Tom wanted to say something to break the unbearable quiet, but the words caught in his throat. What was there to say? That they had imagined it? That the house was old and old houses made noises? None of that would explain what they had both just heard. Then a sound. Not a voice this time. Something more tangible. A slow, deliberate creak. The sound of weight shifting against wood. Came from the staircase. Rachel flinched, her entire body recoiling as her gaze snapped toward the darkened steps. The upstairs hallway beyond was swallowed in shadow, an impenetrable void where the dim light from the living room couldn't reach. The stairs had been silent until now, no creaks, no shifts, nothing. But something had moved. Tom's mouth felt dry. He willed himself to take a breath, to push air into his lungs. The air tasted stale, tinged with something he couldn't quite name. A trace of dust, perhaps, or something older. His instinct told him to turn on the hallway light. That was the logical thing to do. But his body refused to move, as if some deep, primitive part of his brain had already decided whatever was up there, it was better left unseen. Rachel whispered his name, barely audible, like she was afraid to disturb whatever lay beyond the staircase. He turned to her, taking in the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Then, another creak. This time it was unmistakable. Something was descending the stairs. Not quickly, not with urgency, but with slow, measured steps, as if testing each one before moving forward. Tom counted them in his head, his entire body bracing with each muted groan of the wood. 1, 2, 3. The air grew heavier with each step. Rachel's hand trembled in his. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Then nothing. The footsteps stopped. Right at the bottom of the stairs. Right in front of them. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He saw nothing, only the yawning darkness of the hallway, the vague outline of the staircase in the dim light. But the silence now felt watchful, expectant, as if something stood there, just beyond the edge of their vision, waiting. Rachel let out a small, involuntary sound, barely more than a breath. Tom swallowed hard, forcing himself to do something, anything to break the unbearable stillness. His hand darted toward the light switch. The hallway flooded with light, and the space in front of the stairs was empty. Nothing there. No one there. Just the faint, lingering scent of something unfamiliar, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old wood and damp earth. Rachel exhaled shakily, her body sagging in relief, but Tom didn't move. His eyes remained locked on the staircase, his skin still crawling with the undeniable sensation that something had just been there, watching, listening, waiting, for what he didn't know. But somehow he knew this wasn't over. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The glow from the hallway light cast long, trembling shadows across the floor. Tom's breath came unevenly, the air thick with something invisible yet undeniable. He could still feel it, that awful, suffocating presence lurking just beyond the edges of his vision. The stairs stood empty, the wooden steps as lifeless as they had always been. And yet, the footsteps, they had been real. Rachel let go of his hand, rubbing her arms as if trying to chase away a chill that refused to leave her skin. She took a slow step forward, hesitant, as if testing the reality of the space in front of her. Tom wanted to pull her back, to tell her not to go any farther, but the words stuck in his throat. She paused at the base of the stairs, staring upward into the dim hallway above. "There's nothing there," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. Tom didn't answer. The silence that followed felt deliberate, charged with something unspoken. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty home, it was the absence of sound that comes only when something else is listening. Then, from above them, the softest of sounds. A slow, dragging breath. Rachel stepped back so quickly she nearly stumbled. Tom caught her by the arm, steadying her, but his own legs felt unsteady beneath him. His pulse pounded in his ears, deafening in the quiet. He forced himself to look up, to trace the darkened hallway where the sound had come from. Nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched intensified, sharp and undeniable. Rachel shook her head. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, Tom. I don't want to be here right now." Neither did he. Without another word, he reached for the light switch and flicked it off. Darkness swallowed the hallway again. The presence remained. It didn't need light. They turned away. Tom kept his hand at the small of Rachel's back as they walked hurried back toward the living room, back toward the illusion of safety. The air seemed easier to breathe here, but the weight of the moment lingered, pressing against them like an invisible force. Rachel sat down on the edge of the couch, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing in particular. Tom hesitated, then sat beside her. "We need to talk about this," he said finally, his voice quieter than he meant it to be. Rachel let out a short, humorless laugh. "Talk about what?" She turned to him, her expression a mixture of fear and frustration. "That our house, our home, is haunted? That we just heard footsteps on an empty staircase?" Tom rubbed his hands over his face, exhaustion settling into his bones. "I don't know what we heard." Rachel looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "Liar." He didn't argue. The night stretched on, heavy and unrelenting. They left the hallway light on, but neither of them slept. Every so often, Tom swore he heard it again, soft, almost imperceptible. A whisper against the stillness of the house, a breath in the dark. And each time, Rachel's hand would tighten around his beneath the covers, her silent way of telling him that she heard it too. The house wasn't empty, and whatever was there, it wasn't finished with them yet. The hours dragged on, slow and relentless, stretching the night into something unbearable. The house settled around them with the kind of silence that didn't feel natural, not just an absence of sound, but something deeper, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every so often, the wood creaked softly, distant and uncertain, as though something unseen was moving just out of reach. Tom lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He had given up on sleep hours ago. Beside him, Rachel hadn't moved in what felt like an eternity. Her body curled in on itself beneath the blankets, her breathing too shallow, too controlled. She was awake. She was pretending not to be. Tom swallowed, his throat dry. His mouth tasted stale, as though the air itself had gone stagnant. A sound. Not loud, not even clear. Just the faintest suggestion of movement in the hallway beyond their bedroom door. He didn't turn his head. Didn't need to. He felt it. The shift in the air. The unshakable sensation of something standing just beyond the threshold. Waiting. Rachel's breathing hitched. She felt it too. For a long time, neither of them moved. The dark pressed in around them, thick and heavy. The warmth of the blankets felt meaningless, flimsy, as if they were nothing more than a thin barrier between them and whatever watched from the other side of the door. And then, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not at the front door. Not at the window. At their bedroom door. Rachel let out a sharp breath, barely containing a gasp. Tom went rigid, his body locking up so completely that even breathing felt impossible. His mind scrambled for logic, for some kind of rational explanation, but there was none. The house was locked. They were alone. The knocks came again. Soft, measured. Too human to be a house settling. Too real to be imagined. Rachel turned her head slowly, barely moving, her eyes wide in the darkness. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Tom forced himself to sit up. Every muscle in his body protested. Every nerve screaming at him to stay still, to ignore it, to pretend they hadn't heard anything. But they had. They both had. He reached toward the bedside lamp with a hand that felt like it no longer belonged to him, his fingers cold and unsteady. The second his fingertips brushed the switch, something shifted. The air, the pressure in the room, like a presence withdrawing, like something stepping back from the door. The sensation lasted only a moment, but Tom felt it like a physical thing in absence, an emptiness where something had just been. He turned on the light. A warm glow flooded the room, chasing away the deepest shadows. The bedroom door remained closed, perfectly normal, perfectly still. No sign that anyone had been there at all. Rachel sat up beside him, her breathing still uneven, her hands gripping the blankets in white-knuckled fists. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at the door. She just stared straight ahead, unblinking, as if afraid that if she moved, if she acknowledged it, it might start again. Tom swung his legs over the edge of the bed. He hesitated for a second, his bare feet hovering above the wooden floor, as though expecting it to be ice-cold beneath him. It wasn't. Felt normal, solid, real. He stood. Rachel tensed. "Tom, I need to check," he muttered. Rachel grabbed his wrist before he could move. Her grip was stronger than he expected. "Don't." He met her gaze. "We can't just ignore it." Rachel's jaw tightened. Her eyes flickered toward the door, then back to him. "Maybe we should." Her voice was too calm, too careful. Tom realized she wasn't just afraid of the door. She was afraid of what might happen if they acknowledged it, if they opened it. He hesitated. And then, from somewhere inside the house, a sound. A voice. Soft. Hoarse. A single word. "Please." Rachel inhaled sharply, her fingers digging into his wrist. Tom felt his own breath catch in his throat, a cold weight settling deep in his chest. The voice hadn't come from the hallway. It had come from inside the room. The voice settled over the room like a layer of frost-thin but inescapable, clinging to the air, to the walls, to the very marrow of Tom's bones. Rachel's grip on his wrist turned vice-like, her fingers trembling but unrelenting. She hadn't turned her head. She hadn't moved at all. She was still staring straight ahead, her pupils blown wide, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Tom swallowed, trying to work moisture into his mouth. The voice, hoarse, weak, impossibly close, hadn't come from the hallway. It had come from inside the room. Tom forced himself to turn his head, slow and deliberate, every inch of movement making his skin crawl. The air felt heavier now, thick with something unseen, something waiting. The room was the same. The bedside lamp still cast its weak glow. The blankets were still rumpled from where Rachel had curled into herself. The door still stood shut. But the corner, the farthest, darkest corner of the room, where the light barely reached, it wasn't empty. Tom's breath locked in his throat. A shape stood there, barely more than a shadow. A figure hunched and indistinct, as if the darkness itself had taken form. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. But it was there. Tom couldn't look away. Rachel made a soft, broken sound beside him. A whimper. A plea. The figure shifted. Not much. Just enough to make the air feel sharper. Charged. As if the very act of moving had sent a ripple through the room. Then, a whisper. "Help!" It wasn't an echo of the first voice. It wasn't a repetition. It was new, closer, more desperate. Rachel's hand jerked away from Tom's wrist as if burned. She pressed herself back against the headboard, her entire body rigid with terror. Tom didn't move. He couldn't. The figure took a step forward. The shadows peeled away like layers of dust, revealing something more. A man thin, with sunken features, his skin pallid and stretched too tightly over his bones. His clothes were wrinkled, worn, as if he had been trapped in them for far too long. His hands hung limply at his sides, fingers twitching, the nails cracked and uneven. His mouth was slightly open, lips dry and cracked. His eyes. Tom didn't want to look at his eyes, but he did, and he wished he hadn't. They weren't right. They were dark not just in color, but in depth, as if there was no end to them. Hollow, bottomless, and filled with something that wasn't entirely human. A silent scream built in Tom's throat, his body frozen between the urge to flee and the suffocating grip of fear. The figure took another step, and this time, the sound that came from its mouth was not a whisper. It was a breathy, broken sob. "Please!" Rachel gasped, an involuntary, horrified sound that shattered the stillness. The figure twitched, as if the noise had startled it, and for the first time, its expression changed. Pain. Not anger. Not malice. Just pain. Tom didn't know why he moved, but he did. A step forward, tentative, as if stepping too quickly would cause whatever delicate balance existed here to shatter. The figure's mouth trembled. His gaze, unfocused and distant, flickered between Tom and Rachel, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. And then, in a voice so faint it barely reached their ears, "It's not my home." Rachel stiffened. "What?" The man's form wavered, like smoke caught in a breeze. He blinked slowly, eyes unfocused. "Not my home," he murmured again, more to himself than to them. "Not anymore." And just like that, he was gone. Not abruptly, not in a flicker of light or a sudden gust of wind. He simply faded, dissolving into the air like he had never been there at all. The weight in the room lifted. The cold receded. Tom exhaled sharply, his breath coming out in a shuddering gasp. Rachel was still rigid beside him, her fingers clutching the blanket in a death grip. The room felt empty now, not just visually but in a way that was deeper, more absolute. Rachel's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Was that?" "I don't know." But he did know. Somewhere in his gut, he knew exactly what had just happened. The house had held something that didn't belong, something lost, something searching, and now, it was gone. Rachel sat up, rubbing her arms as if trying to shake off the lingering cold. I don't want to stay here tonight." Tom nodded, already swinging his legs off the bed. "We'll go." They didn't pack. They didn't turn off the lights. They just left. The house stood silent behind them as they drove away. Neither of them looked back. And as the night stretched on, as the miles between them and the house grew, Tom couldn't shake the last thing the figure had said. "Not my home." The words sat heavy in his chest, settling deep into a place he didn't want to acknowledge. Because if it wasn't his home, then whose was it? Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.